When thinking of a specific technique or style that I believe all creative writers should be aware of and experiment with, I immediately thought of Robert Louis Stevenson's use of multiple voices in the form of letters in his novel The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This technique has become elusive in modern-day writing, but has a great history in novels written by authors such as Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Jane Austen. Epistolary style is when a writer incorporates character correspondence into their novel, for example, letters, diary entries, blog posts, etc. Typically, this style of writing allows for an enjoyable incorporation of innocent voyeurism as a way to include the reader in the protagonist's journey. Stevenson's use of the epistolary style with multiple characters illustrates the use of language to educate the reader on the character, develop key story elements, convey perspective shifts, and aids atmosphere development. Within the style of epistolary, letters can be used to educate the reader about characters' history and internal thought processes of unexplored integral characters. Stevenson uses the element of language to portray and develop the character's voice. The different, unique characteristics of language in both letters included in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde portrays the character's level of education and emotion within their circumstances. For example, in Chapter 9, Dr. Lanyon's letter, he uses the language, "The less I understood of this farrago, the less I was in a position to judge of its importance," and an appeal so worded could not be set aside without a grave responsibility. The particular use of the word farrago is a clear example of higher education during the mid to late 1800s, whereas if the character was less educated, a less complex term would have been used, such as hodgepodge or something very similar. The general sequencing of the sentences and complexity of the letter's composition provides a sense of an upper-class British man, while in Dr. Jekyll Mr. Hyde's letter, his language is formal and that of a British gentleman. However, he then slowly loses identity and becomes neither Dr. Jekyll nor Mr. Hyde. This is shown when Dr. Jekyll begins to refer to himself in third person, and the I transforms into a third party in the Dr. Jekyll Mr. Hyde entity. For example, Jekyll had more than a father's interest, Hyde had more than a son's indifference. This element of epistolary style works to develop each character's unique voice and provide the reader with a clearer understanding of the character in order to interpret their point of view. The style also draws attention to key elements of story developments. The form of letters, particularly in comparison to ordinary third-person perspective, allows the writer to draw the reader's attention to key story elements. Letters provide a feeling of inclusion and intimacy for the reader, with the character's thought process and unique knowledge of elusive facts pertaining to the story. Stevenson illustrated this at the end of Dr. Lanyon's letter, explaining his first encounter with Mr. Hyde, and he reveals the first moment he sees Mr. Hyde transform into Dr. Jekyll. Dr. Lanyon describes the scene on observing Mr. Hyde melting away. As for the moral turpitude that man unveiled to me, even with tears of penitence, I cannot even in memory dwell on it without a start of terror. This dramatic reveal that had been anticipated by the reader is revealed in a letter to draw greater attention to the horror and unspeakableness of this new key story element. This is expanded upon when Jekyll admits in his letter, "I knew myself at the first breath of this new life to be more wicked. I was suddenly aware that I had lost in stature," confirming to Dr. Lanyon's story and confirming the big mystery to the readers. The minimal use of letters as an epic conclusion to the novel. The use of them intensifies their impact, and the reader is focused on the key information they convey. The shift to the unique style of epistolary from the standard creative writing form enforces the change of voice and reassures the reader that the author's voice does not interfere with the voice of the character. In the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, the perspective clearly shifts from third person following Dr. Utterson to Dr. Lanyon and then to Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. This perspective change provides a shift for the reader from audience to active participant in the story. The author's voice creating an audience perspective is experienced throughout the majority of the novel, and specifically during the conversation with Dr. Jekyll's butler, discussing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde as two separate individuals, whereas the character's untainted voice was undoubtedly felt in the final chapter, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's letter. I have observed that when I wore the semblance of Edward Hyde, none could come near to me at first without a visible misgiving of the flesh, as well as I once more prepared and drank the cup, once more suffered the pangs of disillusion, and came to myself once more with the character and the stature and the face of Henry Jekyll. This clear change of voice provides the audience with a truthful, unbiased point of view of events separate from the author's or third person's perspective. The use of point of view shifts provides an evolving experience and role for the reader, and creates a confidence that the author's voice is not interfering with the perspective, an untainted, honest account of the story's events. Stevenson used epistolary to convey different perspectives sparingly. This created a unique and dramatic atmosphere around the two concluding letters. In Stevenson's novel, the minimalist use of letters emphasized the significance of them for the reader. The use of them to convey critical moments and information built a dramatic and conclusive atmosphere around the letters' use. Stevenson used this style to emphasize the conclusion of the character's demise and reveal of momentous knowledge as a mic drop moment for the character. Due to the language and voice changes from the rest of the novel, the letters stand in stark contrast and shift the reader that renewed curiosity as the first-person perspective energized the revelations held in the letters. Upon learning of the existence of the novel's concluding letters, the reader is filled with renewed enthusiasm for the story's mystery to be revealed. This is triggered by the final sentence from Mr. Utterson's narrative after the discovery of Mr. Hyde's body and the disappearance of Dr. Jekyll. This set the scene for the crescendo for each letter's monologue, in which the character, in turn, reveals their most intimate truths, stating their final confession and signing off with their last farewell. Using the stylistic technique of epistolary provided a mechanism to quickly introduce a dramatic atmosphere and much-needed change of pace and voice. The personal account portrayed through the use of epistolary is not restricted to the traditional letters and diary entries of the past, but can now be used to represent relevant points of view through modern forms of communication. To fully understand the possibilities of the use of epistolary style, I utilized the technique in a short story I wrote. My story shows multiple exchanges between two people on an online chat forum, while one of them is struggling to cope with her young daughter's battle with cancer. I wrote in the form of messages on an online chat forum, using 2 point of views to modernize the style and show a unique and relevant example of how the epistolary style can be used by writers today. I mimic Stevenson's use of multiple points of view in the form of this style, as I believe the style is used best to show an intimate view into different sides of a certain event. For example, in my story, I utilized the changing of unique voices to create a tense atmosphere by incorporating one-sided conversations. After seeing this modern example of the use of multiple voices in the form of the epistolary style, it is clear to see the ease at which this style can be used by writers today, and how it lends itself to our modern style of communication and messaging. The incorporation of multiple voices through the use of the epistolary style can be utilized in modern-day creative writing to incorporate intimate points of view and create a more absorbed reader. I believe the modern reader is drawn in by the personal storytelling of the epistolary style, and that there is a lack of stories utilizing this style. Writers can create a current and relevant version of this storytelling technique by swapping the classic letters for blog posts, tweets, texts, or emails. This writing style has been well received by readers across the globe in recent novels such as Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky and Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. However, I believe writers should incorporate this style into their writing to enhance their relatability and inclusivity. As modern writers, we should use multiple different voices in the epistolary style to revitalize the techniques and styles commonly used in creative writing. Epistolary style offers a writer the opportunity to provide unique insight into their characters, to quickly develop atmosphere, character elements, and clear perspective shifts. This style is something that I will definitely include in my writing in the future to ensure that I create an engaging, riveting, and individual reading experience.